Ted Cruz has an important announcement today. He announced that he is running for president. Now, he announced this run, of course, earlier today in front of a speech of 80,000, supposedly 80,000 people at the same university founded by Jerry Falwell. Yay, great. So he's on a great start.
Right, yeah, it was Liberty, right? That was the university?
Liberty University. Yep.
Yeah, because I was wondering, like, what's going to be next. I think, like, Rand Paul's going to announce his at, like, Bob Jones University or something like that. Like,
it has to be something Liberty-related.
Right.
Think, when it comes to Ted Cruz.
Donald Trump's going to announce his at the University of Phoenix, though. That's how it's going to roll for him.
Absolutely. I wonder if he's going to bring that thing that he calls hair. Whatever that alien that's probably attached to his skull.
Yeah. I think eventually they got to just make a Muppet out of that thing.
They should.
And like maybe the Muppet actually says things that make kind of sense, and that's the irony of it all.
It would be incredible irony. Now, of course, he's quoted as saying, "It's a time for truth, a time to rise to the challenge, just as Americans have always done. It's going to take a new generation of courageous conservatives to help make America great again, and I'm ready to stand with you to lead the fight."
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, people say that Ted Cruz is unqualified because of his views on global warming. I say that is just the tip of the melting iceberg. He is unqualified in many ways. And another thing is, all right, what is with the conservatives and all their alliteration that they got going on? First, it was compassionate conservative. Now it's courageous conservative. They got to stick with one. You're either a compassionate conservative or a courageous conservative. I can think of other C words. I don't know, but
I don't think they ever really qualified as compassionate.
I don't think so either. Courageous? I don't know. It depends on how you're looking at courageous. Is Ted Cruz courageous? I don't know. I mean, he's courageous in the sense that he says things where it's like, oh, really? You believe that? But
it's really courageous to come out and admit how stupid you are on some of these issues. And actually, that's a good segue into some of the issues that Ted Cruz believes in. Now, since we're going to be seeing a lot more of him in the news, in the media, it's important to go with and actually talk about some of the stuff he actually believes and some of the stuff he's actually said. Now, when it comes to climate change, this is really funny. See, conservatives aren't exactly in favor of admitting that there's climate change, and when they do, they don't actually admit that it's also that humans contribute to it. So, while Ted Cruz is one of the ones who really doesn't even want to admit that it's happening, and that humans are contributing, of course, because, and get this, he doesn't want to admit it because it snowed in New Hampshire.
Right. Yes. It's cold where you're at, even though when you actually look at what scientific consensus has said about climate change and global warming, they say that precipitation will actually increase because of just the changing atmosphere and stuff. Like, you have people like him that are like, well, it's cold where I am, so clearly global warming must be a hoax because we're not sunbathing in Minneapolis in February yet. So it was just made up. Don't be alarmed anymore.
And also, I don't know about you, but I think winter still happens.
Yeah, it's definitely still
cold in winter, despite the fact that we do have warmer land temperatures. And have you ever noticed that they never really complain about climate change or global warming, or never try to debunk it during the summer?
You're right. Yeah, it's on hiatus then. It's only when it's cold out. We're like, see, it's cold. We're miserable.
Or you could be like Senator Inhofe, throwing a snowball in the middle of the Senate.
Yeah, right. That was his dissent. I've actually heard this too. I don't know, not to get too far off the topic, but have you heard the new kind of buzzword that I think some of the climate deniers are using now is global alarmism. Have
Yes.
you heard that?
Oh, yes, I've heard it.
I heard that for the first time recently, and I was like, really? That's like, and it was somebody said something along the lines of, global warming and climate change are just propaganda terms and are just part of global alarmism. like, right? We need the terminology that has been peer reviewed in scientific journals, like global alarmism. That's a good one.
And they've been calling us people who actually understand. Well, we don't always have to understand the entire amount of science. Like, we're not scientists ourselves, right?
Sure.
But generally, we tend to trust people who are in these positions who have studied it all their lives. And, they call us alarmists for actually, looking at the studies and looking at their conclusions of all the tests that they've done and, calling us alarmists for actually saying that, hey, you know what, all this peer-reviewed science seems to be saying something. Maybe we should listen. But no, it's because we're all, believing in Al Gore, and the scientists are being funded by the schools to keep doing what they're doing. Never mind the giant piles of money from the fossil fuel industry. No, of course not.
Right, I was going to say, there's other scientists that are funded in different ways too, but...
Of course.
I mean, and on the Ted Cruz, getting this back to Ted Cruz, when you see somebody in the political sphere that is so willing to completely demonize the idea of science and scientific consensus, even though it's been peer review, it's been well tested, that there's mass consensus, it's scary. I mean, that's not a person that should be making any decisions for a populace. They should be deciding what they want to have for breakfast, and outside of that, I don't know what else they should be trusted with very, very much so. So, I mean, I don't think he's going to get very far. Mm-hmm. I don't think people, even on the right, are too thrilled with the idea of him running. I mean, this guy, some of the stuff he said and some of the stuff he's painted so far, it's kind of like he's a parody of a parody. I mean, almost in Sarah Palin land.
Right.
So I don't see this guy getting very far at all. But at least he had a fun event at Liberty for himself.
Oh, yeah. Well, speaking of trust, right? Speaking of what you would trust him with, you actually can't trust Ted Cruz when it comes to issues of liberty. And this goes to one of his positions that he's not good, and he's not interested at all in liberty, and that's when it comes to same-sex marriage. He calls it tragic and indefensible that we would somehow actually allow people of the same sex to have the same rights to marriage as you and I do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and again, that's just something, he's so disconnected, and a lot of those, I mean, it's just fringe politics at this point. You're so far disconnected from consensus. I mean, every single poll, which, by the way, and these are polls done by the major cable outlets and stuff, so these are polls that are being taken by, aging Americans and people that actually still watch that stuff. And even that's indicating that the majority of people are fine with same-sex marriage, that see it either as, gay people should have the same rights as everybody else, or they see it as, let the people decide, why should the government be involved if they're more libertarian-leaning or whatever. And yet you have these fringe politicians like Ted Cruz or whoever else that are kind of just catering to this base that, even though it is dwindling in numbers, it is still very mighty in dollars. And they just say these completely bogus things that makes you kind of just be like, what?
And they're very rabid, too.
Oh, yeah. It's very vicious speech that you hear from these guys a lot.
Oh, yeah. On another issue, of course, dealing with the, the social, what do they call that? Not social conservatism. Well, I mean, it definitely has to do with it, but the culture wars. That's what I was looking for. He refers to emergency contraception, the Plan B over-the-counter stuff, or what they want to make over-the-counter. He labels it as an abortifacient. which is not scientifically accurate. But knowing Ted Cruz's stance on other scientific topics, it's no surprise that he gets this one wrong too. Like, how did he do in science class? He must not have done very well.
Or he did fine, and then later decided to just demonize the whole field of study, which is something, I mean, that even like somebody like a Ken Ham, that they say that the concept of science has been hijacked, and it's like, well, what does that mean? I mean, science is all about exploration and exploring, and people that use pseudoscience, whether it be a religion or whatever else, to explain that which is inexplicable or to dismiss findings that they find inconvenient.
Right.
I mean, that's just the total opposite of science. You can't say, oh, well, you're hijacking science. Like, no, you're not even contributing to the conversation. You're just playing this fringe character. And it's, and quite frankly, it's just very tired. And I think if the Republicans put up somebody like that, they're dead in the water, and I think they know that. So in some ways, hey, Ted Cruz in 2016, have him be your guy.
Right. There's other policies and stuff that he's said some obviously very ignorant things on. For example, Social Security being the Ponzi scheme that we've heard a lot of that from people who are more libertarian leaning, who are convinced that Social Security will no longer be around for them. And while we do have issues, significant issues with Social Security, at the same time, it's a program that's worked and can be easily fixed. But calling it a Ponzi scheme, saying that it's not going to be there, or the people who are on it are mostly just taking advantage of it, that's ridiculous. And it's, I think, to go along with your theme of he's not going to go very far. You get a lot of people who survive on Social Security benefits that are. Basically, whenever they hear the words cut or it's not going to be there, they get freaked out, even if it doesn't really apply to them. And I think that's sort of his plan to go for the younger people and saying, look, that's not going to be around for you. Why don't you put it into a private security account or whatever, a private savings account that Wall Street can also raid.
Right. I think if that's his plan, he's going to have to really stop being such an extremist guy when it comes to a lot of social issues. Yeah. Because, I mean, study after study after study after study has shown that to appeal to, the millennials, our age group, if you want to appeal to them on the right or whatever, you have to be a more Ron Paul style libertarian type candidate.
Right.
I mean, that's who. When it comes to social issues, you're either left when it comes to social issues, or you're completely neutral and say let the states decide. And then on the fiscal end of things, that's where you're more conservative leaning. Sure. I mean, any politician that wants to appeal to millennials, they need to take that platform. Otherwise, I don't see how they would have any chance of success. And I think Ted Cruz is already too far gone to take that platform. People will see through that, or at least they should.
And speaking of far gone, on some of his issues in foreign policy, especially when you're talking about millennials who have little interest in a hawkish foreign policy. Well, people like Ted Cruz, and he's been quoted saying stuff like this. He's worried about Sharia law in America. Muslims coming over here and creating Sharia law in America. And I think the irony of that whole thing is that Ted Cruz is very much interested in creating and bringing his own brand. I call it Christian Sharia law, which is almost the same thing, basically trying to dissolve the separation between church and state and basically govern by the right-wing version of the Bible, which isn't at all, I think, compatible with the actual teachings of Jesus, for example.
Right. Yeah, I actually, what you're referring to, I have a term for it too that I like to use, and I like to refer to it as Christian chauvinism, because it's just really trying to impose a certain brand of Christianity that by no means reflects everybody that considers themselves a Christian.
Of course not.
nowhere close. In fact, if anything, it reflects a very small minority, I would say. But really wants to impose that mode of thinking. That, and
Right.
again, like you said, based on what I've read about Jesus and the teachings of Jesus, and I've actually read the Bible before, cover to cover, because YOLO. But
Right.
I have read that book cover to cover, Old and New Testament. I skimmed the genealogy stuff a good bit, but for the most part, I read the book just as a scholar of life or whatever. And I don't really see where a lot of these people are coming from. But it's interesting here how when we went from every issue, we pretty much just covered all of the buzz points of the corporate media, right? You go from denying climate change, you go to Islamophobia, you go to homophobia. I mean, this guy's got all those bases covered, and he has a very fringe and dated and slowly but surely becoming obsolete view of these things. I mean, if you're saying he's going to try to appeal to young people, he's doing the complete opposite of that. I mean, this guy is appealing to, I would say, the lowest common denominator Fox News viewer, the person that has an average age of about 71, 72 years old, and just thinks this is the truth because it's on the TV, takes Bill O'Reilly's fear-mongering seriously, and then goes to the voting poll once every 2 to 4 years. That's who he's appealing to. And that's not enough. It doesn't work that way anymore. That's not enough to win you an election. Obama, the past 8 years, has proven that.
I want to go back just a little bit earlier and address your point about how it's not how this guy doesn't represent the view of a lot of Christians. And I tend to be considered somebody who is against Christianity, and I kind of want to push back against that whole notion. The whole reason that people like us, especially, push back and really kind of present these people, at least in my case, I go through and I present some of the extreme things coming out of the Christian right. Some of the extreme stuff that they say, because I know that they don't represent a majority of Christians, and I really want a majority of people who are Christian to see that and to see what these people are saying in their name, and for them to push back against it, to say that is not the brand of Christianity we represent. That's not who we are as a movement, and you guys are fringe. You guys are fringe. You guys are crazy. We don't want anything to do with you.
Right. Yeah, I think you have a great point there, and I think what you described is happening to a degree. I mean, there's a lot of there's cross left and stuff like that. I mean, there are a lot of groups out there of people that identify as Christian but see a lot of the values that Jesus taught and see those as the ultimate teaching, and a lot of this stuff that the Christian right has evoked, they see that as very harmful. They see that it's very vicious and violent and judgmental, and the opposite of everything that the Middle Eastern peace-knit pacifists taught them, right? And I think that is happening.
Yeah, it's basically right now the Christian right has really kind of adopted the Franklin Graham or Billy Graham sort of tying in incredibly right-wing ideologies, especially when it comes to economic ideologies, tying that in with Christianity since the 1980s. And I think that's, more people need to be aware that is not what actually what Jesus was about and what the New Testament was about. And it's we have to go back to those if we're going to have a dominant, mostly dominant religion, not in the government, but as the share of believers in America, that they need to actually know and understand what the actual belief is, understanding what your faith system is supposed to be comprised of.
Right. And I think some of the stuff you're getting at here too, again, a lot of studies indicate our age, the millennial generation, we're turning away from organized religion in record numbers. I mean, and as a result, we're becoming a much more secular society. Now, our parents' generation, even if ideologically we're similar, That's not happening as much. And I think a lot of that has to do with what generations were exposed to.
Mm-hmm.
Our parents, for instance, remember back when evangelicals were a bunch of peacenik hippies going around before it got tarnished and poisoned by the Pat Robertsons of the world.
Right.
They remember when the idea of Christianity and the church, regardless of the denomination you were, was kind of all about community and kind of all about helping each other. Sure, it still had its problems, but it wasn't anything close to the corruption that we have today. But, corruption and religion have gone hand in hand in human history.
Oh, for sure.
For as long as it's been around.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the wave that we're experiencing is much different, I would say, than what our parents have experienced. And as a result, you have a different response to this. And so I think a lot of it kind of falls on our generation to make it clear that it's like either, you do identify with a certain belief system and you want to claim it back and say, we don't represent this hateful narrative that some of these extremists are trying to paint us all under. Right. Or you say, you know what, no thank you, I'm not going to be part of the club anymore. And, I personally chose the latter. I'm like, I don't really fall under any I guess technically I'm agnostic, but,
yeah.
I don't really fall under any category. And I think that's happening more and more.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are taking the same route as you have. Me, I'm more of an atheist, agnostic. I don't. There's no proof for me, but that's just me personally. But we can go back to Ted Cruz for a minute here. He does represent that very extreme version of Christianity, and that's important to point out. That he is not at all like what Jesus said you should be like. But anyway, one of the other things that I want to kind of point out is that Ted Cruz is also somebody who believes in some crazy conspiracy theories, and you don't really want somebody who believes in conspiracy theories, right? Like the really nutty ones. You don't want somebody like that to be in power.
I'm not super familiar with this. Elaborate on this.
Well,
because
he basically
you've piqued my curiosity, sir.
He's you've heard of Agenda 21, correct? Or no?
I've heard of it, but summarize it, please.
Okay, so Agenda 21 is a non-binding resolution passed through the United Nations in order to help promote sustainability. Mm-hmm. Now, that's what a normal person knows about Agenda 21. And it does sound a little ominous, let's be honest with you. Mm-hmm. It sounds a bit ominous, but it's really not. Because, like you said, it is there. It is a non-binding resolution. We signed on to it to help promote sustainability around the United States. Now, you ask somebody who's, you ask Ted Cruz, for example, he believes it is a plot by the UN to send in the jackbooted thugs to take your house and force you to live into a hobbit home. For example, quote, in a 2012 article on his Senate campaign site, and this is from Think Progress, Cruz warned that George Soros and others backed a 1992 United Nations agenda to abolish unsustainable environments, including golf course, grazing pastures, and paved roads.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't even know if you should just hand him the label conspiracy theorist believer or whatever. I think this goes more into this guy is completely xenophobic and excessively nationalistic to the point where it's completely toxic, and he'll believe any narrative that supports that. And this is one of them. Right? I mean, I'm sure he's skeptical of the aspirin that comes from Canada. I'm sure he's any type of universal healthcare system, he will, of course, demonize. And this is the complete opposite of what we need in the United States in 2016. The complete opposite of that. Obama has at least done a better job at repairing some of our international relations, at least compared to the Bush administration. Yeah. I think everybody was hoping he would have done a little better, but it at least, compared to where we were at, 2000, we're better off. And you need to keep moving forward with that, and that's just one of those things. I mean, somebody like a Ted Cruz, we're going to have the rest of the world rolling their eyes at us again. I mean, if he gets anything anywhere close to the way, I don't think he's going to. I don't think he will not have any support for the Republicans because they're not that short-sighted. I don't think, at least when it comes to winning.
I think he will get support from a lot of Republicans, but what we'll be missing is the money people, and that's really what it comes down to. That's who matters the most. Unfortunately, in the system, the post-Citizens United, Buckley, Vallejo, Bellotti, whatever situation that we have with money in politics, it's really the money people who matter. And even though last election, we did see, people like Rick Santorum being floated by a Foster Friess type of, money man, and of course Newt Gingrich with Sheldon Adelson, which, by the way, Adelson plans on dropping back in and dropping all sorts of money bombs. We just don't know who they're going to be targeted at. The money people are what matters, and maybe we'll see an eccentric billionaire help Ted Cruz get past that problem. But when it comes to Wall Street, they're not interested in any of this social conservative stuff, any of this kooky stuff. I mean, he's called a wacko bird, for example.
Right.
They're
Yeah.
not interested in that. So it would be easier to see. It would be more likely to see them back someone more of like a Scott Walker or a possibly Jeb Bush type of candidate as opposed to a Ted Cruz. But remember, since money does have such a huge influence in the system, and we do have the world's richest people, essentially, especially billionaires that love to drop money into these elections, maybe we'll see him continue to get floated, at least in that way, through the election. So we'll see how long he lasts.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and there's going to be some people floating some money his way, I'm sure.
Oh, for
but
sure.
as far as, because I think a lot of these people, that they learned from the past. They learned like what a waste it was to invest in somebody like a Rick Santorum.
We'll see.
But I mean, I may be giving people too much credit. You're right. But assuming I'm not,
I'm a bit
I don't know.
skeptical.
We'll see.
I'm a bit cynical myself. I am.
As you should be. As you should be. I mean, you're probably going to be the person that's right in this scenario. But, I'd like to think they learned from investing in someone like a Rick Santorum. And Ted Cruz, I think, is very comparable to a Rick Santorum as far as a candidate goes.
Oh, yeah.
The big difference is that we're 8 years in the future now. I mean, it's not even 2008 anymore. People have progressed a little bit more even. So, I don't know. I think that people are going to be very wary of this guy. And so far, the press response, even from people on the right, has indicated as such. But
Right.
we'll see.
Well, yeah, and you know what? We still have a long time to 2016 and a very large clown car to fill. So we'll see. We'll see who gets in to drive shotgun on this one. So, but no matter who else comes in, we know at least for a while we're going to have Ted Cruz as a hanger-on.
No, there's going to be there'll be a fun cast of characters. There always is.
There always is.
There's never, yeah. That's one thing you can depend on in our process.
For sure.